What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. Today we're going to press pause on our movie coverage and instead talk about some good news for once. The early access version of No Rest for the Wicked dropped late last week, and my first impressions can be summed up with a few simple words. Hell fucking yeah. Now, plenty could change between now and the official release of the game. We've seen that happen before, but right now, as it stands, this game is well and thoroughly scratching an itch that I hoped would be scratched last year by Diablo 4, but that game was a giant, colossal disappointment. I gave up on playing Diablo 4 after only a few weeks, but with No Rest for the Wicked, I've already reached that kind of weird, crazy, obsessive stage where there is nothing I'd rather be doing apart from playing the game. And I've been playing it constantly for the last 3 days, and I've screamed more F-bombs than I can count, dying one horrific death after another, all with the world's biggest smile on my face, and I'm sure my neighbors are ready for me to move on to another game at this point. In any event, if you've been following this channel for any length of time, you'll know that dark adult fantasy are my 3 favorite words in the English language, but I so rarely get to enjoy this subgenre in the world of film and television. There are exceptions, of course, but the reality is that if you love the fantasy genre, the best stuff usually comes in the form of a great book or a great video game. Like in 2022, Elden Ring completely took over my life. And then in 2023, Baldur's Gate 3 took over my life to such an extent that I worried I was going to have like permanent lasting nerve damage in my mouse clicking finger. And while an early access version of a game is no basis for comparison with completed games, but so far so good, No Rest for the Wicked has given me precisely the hardcore dark fantasy experience that I am always searching for. But if you're unfamiliar with the game, here's the pitch. It was developed by Moon Studios. It's an action RPG, but it does have a few Souls-like game mechanics, but what sets it apart, as is the case with all games, is the execution of the concept. And let's start with the distinctive visual style. The look of the animated cutscenes, as well as the gameplay itself, are unique. And I suspect that the heavily stylized look of the game might be divisive due to the kind of exaggerated features of the characters. Everybody kind of looks like they might be like the inbred step cousin of Quasimodo, like long arms and short legs, like you're kind of deformed. But for my part, I just ate it up. I could watch an entire animated feature film in this style. I love the dramatic sequences. I love the voice acting. I love the writing. It was all first rate. And also, I just love it when a story completely embraces a really pure style, totally uncompromised by any detail that might clash with the overall aesthetic experience of the game. But style means nothing if you don't have addictive gameplay. And for me, the main draw of the game is the exploration. Whether you're doing quests, running dailies, or grinding for all the materials that you need to rebuild kind of like your main hub, when it comes to exploring this world, every inch of it, every little detail, every little pebble or stone, it all feels so lovingly handcrafted, all for maximum dramatic effect. And usually when you're talking about animation or a video game, when you have an environment that's like very meticulously crafted and detailed, usually that's for like background art. But here, it's all incredibly solid and tactile, and you can pretty much interact with all of it. You can climb over it, you can smash through it, or you can, unlock secret doors. It's all very satisfying where you really feel like you're living in the world. And the way they're able to pull that off is through a fixed camera angle. And I would say that 99% of the time that fixed camera angle works just fine, where you're able to see the action, you're able to see your foes, you're able to see where you want to go. And on the few rare occasions where the fixed camera angle did not work out, usually meant I was trying to go somewhere that was physically impossible, which usually means you're about to fall into a zone that you're not prepared for and fight a bunch of monsters that are going to kill you, or you're just going to fall to your death. Remember earlier when I mentioned all the F-bombs? I cannot tell you how many times I fell to my death over the last couple of days, but the exploration is so fun and so rewarding and so interactive. I strongly recommend that you basically explore a zone very, very slowly, then go over it again, then go over it again, and usually your quests or your dailies or your farming exercises are going to take you back to zones anyway, but it's very rewarding to go back over kind of the same ground twice just to see what you missed the last time through. And the zones do this cool thing where if you kill something, it stays dead for a while. And whether you're chopping down trees or mining up some ore or whatever, like there are these little nodes for getting all the mats that you need. And those slowly but surely regenerate as well. But what's fun is how at different points in the game, after you've done certain quests, the zones will change and the bad guys will get a little stronger. And so you don't feel like you're just going back and killing a bunch of trash. You can actually get really fresh challenges back in the starting zone. I guess over the course of my early access, on 2 separate occasions, the starting zone really leveled up and it basically allowed me to kind of explore it all over again. But even if you have an incredibly dense, intricate environment to explore, which is always good fun, it's much more fun if you have a character that you're in love with. So let's talk about customization, because you begin the game totally unexceptional in every way. You have average stats across the board, no class to speak of, no gear. But as you start picking things up and using them to kill the people that are trying to kill you, you start to progress, and then you start to assign points wherever you want them. And you're free to build any kind of character you like, provided that you can either find or buy or create the gear that you want. And I kept it real simple. Early on, I found a big-ass sword. It was slow and very easy to interrupt, but when it connected, it hit in such satisfying fashion with so much like bone-crunching intensity and great sound effects. I was like, all right, I'm just going to play the rest of the game with this sword. And due to the way that you can do upgrades in the game, you can add runes or improve the damage. And of course, there's scaling involved. So as your stats go up, your weapons will go up with your stats. And so every time I leveled up, I would just pump as many points as I could into the stats that would allow me to smash my foes and to keep smashing them. But as I mentioned before, the game has a ton of Souls-like mechanics, which means like parries and ripostes and backstabs, but also stamina management and also poise. Poise is insanely important, or at least it was insanely important to my build, because every time someone would breathe on me, my swing would get interrupted. So distance management and timing are incredibly important, and your foes oftentimes, they're fast, they're aggressive, they're coming after you, but you basically kind of slip in, slip out, like with these feints, and when the moment comes, do your big attack, so on and so forth. But timing and poise are going to be incredibly frustrating and rewarding for players who like those kind of game mechanics. And my next compliment's kind of hard to back up because it's totally subjective, but there's something about this game which just screams pure, raw, hardcore medieval fantasy. And depending upon your experiences with books or tabletop RPGs or movies, everybody's going to have a different idea of what that represents. Like for some people, it's going to be like early 80s Dungeons and Dragons, like that screams fantasy. And for some people, it's going to be a great Frank Frazetta painting. And for some people, it's going to be a Michael Moorcock short story. Like everybody's got a different idea of what pure medieval fantasy means. But there's something about this game where I was playing it, where it's like, yeah, like it feels airtight. It feels complete. This world feels unique. It feels like its own thing, but it also feels like it's part of a tradition that goes back many, many decades where we've enjoyed medieval fantasy experiences in so many different ways. This game and the people who made it, they're not charlatans. They're not promising one experience and then offering another. Like they are, for people who like games like Path of Exile or people who like Diablo 2 or Diablo 3 or whatever the case might be, but like they're trying to give us the best version of that experience that they possibly can. And right now, at least as it stands, this could change. But right now, it's not compromised by a bunch of weird like monetization angles and that sort of thing. Like I paid $30, I got access to the early access, but it's not saying like, oh, but if you pay $100, well then you have access to all these other zones. Or if you pay $100, you get access to these pieces of gear. Like for me, I like to buy a game and I like to play a game, and I don't want to be distracted by any other concerns. But I've been going quite a bit at this point without addressing the level of challenge that the game offers. If there's an ability to up the difficulty or lower the difficulty, I didn't discover it or come across it. But for me, the difficulty setting was just right, but sometimes bordering on a little too hard. And granted, it's early access. It should be a little too hard as I kind of fine-tune the difficulty level. But there were one or two bosses where I was like, oh God, like I'm gonna have to go out and like grind for an hour just to get a few more strength points or health points or stamina points so that I might have a fighting chance, or go out and grind for 30 minutes and make a bunch of meals that you can use to heal during a battle. But the meals have timers on it, so you can't just like spam heals while spamming your shots. If you heal, sometimes you have to wait 8 seconds, sometimes you have to wait 15 seconds. Once again, timing and distance management are a huge part of this game, but I found that aspect to be very satisfying. It's very strategic. And while the game's filled with lots of mini bosses that'll definitely keep you busy, when it comes to the story quest, there were two main bosses, or kind of 2.5, and one of them maybe took me 5 or 10 tries to kill the first time. The final boss that I killed took considerably more, but what I did when I was getting too frustrated, I'd go back to the town. I think it's called Sacrament or something like that, but inside the town, there are a million little like upgrade quests that are quality of life improvements, both to the vendors as well as your navigation around the town. So it's like, all right, well, if I pick up a bunch of dailies or quests or challenges in town and go out and work on those, that'll keep me busy. And by the time I'm finished with all those, I will have leveled up a little bit and I will have saved up a bunch of meals, and I can go back and try the boss again another time. And slowly but surely, like I never felt like I was struggling to figure out like what should I do next. It's like, oh my God, I've got all these cool little activities that I can use to keep myself busy, or I can focus on progression. And I started getting a little sad when I started running out of options on things to do, because after you've done like your initial upgrades, the upgrades get more expensive. But like you can buy a house and put certain crafting things in there so you can work on your blacksmithing or your woodsmithing or your potion making or anything along those lines. But you can also upgrade like the hotels and the stores or some of the vendors that you work with. And so slowly but surely, you, through your own prioritization, you can decide what aspects of kind of the main hub get developed or improved upon. And it really makes your home feel like your own, where it's like, all right, well, I'm not interested in wearing any cloth armor of any kind. So I don't need to go to the seamstress to work on that. But I know I'm going to be making a lot of armor and weapons, so let's focus on the blacksmith and that sort of thing. So I love all those little side quests to kind of keep you busy. But in the end, it's all about fighting really challenging bosses. And yeah, it definitely delivered on that front. I would say it's about as hard as like Dark Souls 1. But so far, at least, I haven't encountered anything that's on the difficulty level of like one of the toughest bosses from something like Elden Ring. Like 2 years after all my initial battles with Melania in Elden Ring, I think I'm still getting over the emotional trauma of that experience. But now I've kicked her ass many times, so I'm starting to feel better. But speaking of trauma, if you suffer from any like carpal tunnel or anything like that from like using a keyboard or mouse, the good news is you can use an Xbox controller with this game. It's actually recommended. And so, yeah, just through Bluetooth, hook up your Xbox controller or PlayStation controller to your PC, and you are off to the races. And yeah, it's a very, very, very satisfying gameplay. No pain, no stress in the forearms. But getting back to the difficulty level, the game does this really cool thing, which I've never seen before. When you walk into a zone, it'll give you like a difficulty setting. It'll say, hard or moderate or safe. And as you kill things, the difficulty setting will get easier and easier because you're clearing out the zone. Once again, they're very slow respawn times. Even if you die and you come back, as long as you come immediately back, everything will still be dead. So let's say there's a big zone and you're really trying to get to like a secret door or a box of treasure or whatever. Let's just say that the zone is way too challenging for you to do all in one go. Well, clear a third of it. Get as far as you can, die, come back with full health, and you'll just be able to walk through all the dead bodies and continue. And so it rewards that like sustained, continued effort on a zone, even if that zone initially seems to be impossible. And if you're right on the verge of death, if you can get in a killing blow right before you die, then it's totally worth it. But while you don't lose your souls like you would in something like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, you do lose a little durability. So I don't recommend that you just be suicidal, just exploring and falling off things or exploring and getting killed by things, because you will have to pay for repairs over time. And there are like certain items you can find in game to repair your gear, but it will get prohibitively expensive. So they incentivize you to try and stay alive. But don't be afraid to go through a challenging zone, because there's just so much cool shit that you can discover. And by the time you get to the end of the zone, well, it'll be a safe zone, or you will have leveled up, and then you'll feel like you're right where you're supposed to be in terms of progression. Now, as far as complaints go, I have only one big one, and it might just be a personal thing. But when I first got to Sacramento, or the main town hub, it was totally overwhelming. There's so much to do, and there's so many places to go, and so many people to talk to, and so many weird side quests and different like long-term goals that you can unlock. I was like, oh my God, my brain's gonna break. And I ended up like leaving the town and just going and grinding for a while, just as like a palate cleanser. But the town is very rewarding if you continue to explore. First and foremost, there's shortcuts, but there's also places like to stash your gear. There's places to rest and heal up and that sort of thing. But the big one was finding these vendors where I kept finding these little ichors, or these little like kind of vials of fluid. And I was like, what the hell are these things? I usually would get one when I killed a powerful like mini boss. But you can turn in those ichors for quality of life improvements. Let's say you're finding yourself collecting so many mats that you're constantly filling up your bags, as well as kind of like your stash back in your home zone. Well, then you can choose to upgrade that area and get more slots. Or let's say you don't give a crap about making stuff, but instead you just want to carry around a giant arsenal of different weapons to experiment with. Well, then you can increase the number of slots that you have for weapons to be equipped and that sort of thing. So that level of customization when it comes to choosing which quality of life improvements you want, that was awesome. So explore the town, just be patient. And if you're tired of exploring the town and talking to people, go work on a daily, go work on a quest, go gather some mats, and then come back. It's all going to stay more or less the same until you start doing some of the activities which make the town change and grow and improve. So I just love the fact that the town is like a living, breathing thing that's always getting cooler as you invest time and energy into it. But I think that's all I've got to say for now. But I guess in conclusion, I'll just say it was so refreshing and so entertaining and so addictive to play a game with like the gameplay qualities of something like Diablo 2, but drawn and created and rendered in such a way where every frame looks like a painting. And I've never seen a game with that level of detail and that level of artistry where you're able to interact with everything and move things and so on and so forth. Usually that level of detail is reserved for the background and that sort of thing. I could not believe it. Just the whole game just felt like this living, breathing, constantly changing work of art. I loved it. So if you love the fantasy genre, whether you like reading it or watching it or playing it or whatever the case might be, I strongly recommend you check out the early access mode for No Rest for the Wicked. And I don't know when the official release date is going to be. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3, that was in early access for like a year before, or a year and a half before it finally came out. Hopefully we won't have to wait long because I'm obsessed, or maybe at a minimum, they'll add a few more quests or a few more things to do, or I should just do a fresh playthrough with a new build because you can create your own zones and populate those zones with different characters. So yeah, my time with No Rest for the Wicked by no means is drawn to a close, but I hope you enjoyed my first impressions, my first thoughts, my first reactions. If so, like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment. You know the drill. But I hope everybody has a great week. I'll be back in your face tomorrow with a review of the new movie Challengers starring Zendaya. But until then, as always, onwards and upwards.